The one who kidnaps Chin and Yao turns out to be none other than Miss Kang, who wants to use them as leverage to clear her name of any consequence. However, right after she calls the chairman and warns him about it, the person who set the fire 15 years ago rids her of her life and takes the van containing the couple. They wake up the next morning locked inside a cargo container and try to break free, but to no avail. Meanwhile, their friends investigate the kidnapper through CCTV footage, eventually locate the rented van that drove them to the seaport. They immediately make it to the port, but are left completely baffled to see the never-ending numbers of containers, only for Shang-Chi to step in with his motorcycle gang and drone cameras, and Chin, who'd barely kept himself awake inside the suffocating box, overhears the ongoing commotion. To bring their attention to them, takes the daring step to set fire to his coat using the lens of his watch. As soon as the fire catches, his past trauma gets triggered and he collapses in Yao's arm, and by then, she's also awakened by the smoke and tries to comfort Chin until the two are rescued by Shang-Chi. Yao wakes up sometime later in a hospital room and rushes out to ensure Chin's safety, only to find him alive and well. While he flirts with her, the chairman visits him and says he's glad to see him doing well, and meanwhile, Yao reveals the truth about her eyes to Shang-Chi, and he realizes he doesn't really like her, but he is merely under her spell. After spending time together at the hospital as a couple in love, Yao and Chin move back home, and sometime later, the chairman decides to appoint his son to the company's board of directors and prepares a ceremony for his inauguration, which requires him to light a beacon of fire, something Chin is too terrified to do with a straight face. In reality, however, it's Jing Wei's plan to embarrass Chin in front of the audience, as he's aware of his PTSD thanks to his recent hospital admission. Unfortunately, all his evil plans bite the dust when Yao walks up the stage and helps Chin overcome his fears. She later takes him home and nurses him back to good health, much to his gratitude. The day he assumes his new position, the first thing Chin does is find out who the cufflink he had kept from the day of the fire belongs to, only to learn that it belongs to none other than the chairman. That night, Yao surprises Chin by taking him to the seaside, where she lights up fireworks for him, helping him overcome his fear of fire one by one. The next morning, as she visits her mother in the hospital, the unthinkable happens, and she wakes up from a coma, and a few days later, she takes her friends and Chin to meet her, and her mother feels delighted to know that her daughter ended up with Chang after all these years. Later, as he takes her on a walk, he promises to be there for Yao and protect her forever. By the end of the weekend, Christmas arrives and the couple celebrates it with their friends, and after the small party at the flower shop, Chin takes Yao to the city, where he surprises her with a human-sized snow globe and apologizes for their long-ruined amusement park date, and Yao, who was half drunk, is so happy to see this, and she kisses him on the spot. Later, the couple return home and make love for the first time. They wake up in each other's arms the next morning and later have some breakfast together. As Chin slowly grows more and more clingy, Yao asks who the real Chin is, the arrogant prick from before or the needy little boy she's seeing right now. He doesn't mind it, but continues to cling to her and even removes her bed from her room, so she has no choice but to sleep next to him, something Yao secretly loves. The following day, she asks her mother, who used to help at Chang's house, about the arson from 15 years ago, and she explains how it happened right after the chairman, Chang's father, came to visit his family, and she had to leave because the gas was suddenly out. That night, the couple visits the chairman's house in hopes of discovering the other cufflink, confirming their suspicion. However, Chin was left emotionally bothered when the chairman tries to act like a father and even admits to missing him and having a room in his house where he has kept all his toys from years ago. He ignores it, and as soon as everyone falls asleep, searches the attic for the cufflink with Yao, and the two end up finding it, proving that the fire was his doing. A few days later, while Yao was visiting her mother at the hospital, Chin's team finds out that the one who kidnapped them was the same man who set the fire to Chang's house and crashed into Yao's mother's car 15 years ago. Learning this, Chin immediately realizes that his next target would be Yao and her mother, and he rushes to find her at the hospital after failing to get his calls through. Meanwhile, the man was already at the hospital and has set fire to Yao's mother's room with her still inside. Chin gets there a little too late and feels repulsed to even enter the burning room. However, his will to save Yao overrides his fear and he manages to save them both, only to be struck by a flame later. As he loses consciousness, Chin's memories from 15 years ago resurface and he realizes he isn't Chin but Cheng, the real son of the chairman and the little boy who fell in love with Yao as a child. He was merely suffering from dissociative personality disorder to cope with the trauma of losing his mom. After he tells both Song and Jiang about it, he decides not to bother Yao with this revelation for now, and meanwhile, after suffering from an injury to her eyes, Yao is relieved to find that her power to captivate others is gone for good. However, this later makes her paranoid and she wonders if Chin wouldn't love her anymore, and this is proven to be false when he still embraces her at night and confesses that he loves her. The following day, after having a chance confrontation with the chairman at his mother's grave, Chin decides to meet with him at his request. Unfortunately, however, the chairman's car suffers a horrifying collision on his way right after he discovers a bug in his car. The driver dies on the spot and the chairman suffers excessive damage to his skull, barely surviving himself but ending up in an indefinite coma. Chin visits him at the hospital and is visibly upset now that it's proven he was never the mastermind behind his mother's death. There, his half-brother Cheng An pays a visit and blames his return for all the bad stuff that's been happening. Meanwhile, Jing Hui visits the culprit behind everything, a young man called 15, whom he had looked after since he was a kid. A few days later, Yao visits their island to find more clues about the fire and realizes that Chin is actually Chang. On the other hand, Jing Hui calls Chin to his office and blatantly reveals to him how he has masterminded everything that he has suffered, and then threatens to harm Yao and her mother if he doesn't step down from his position right away and forfeit his inheritance. As he returns home after doing as he's told to, Yao calls him on his phone, but before he picks it up, Chin realizes that his car brakes aren't working. His car crashes and he dies, after which Ching An becomes the company's chairman, a position he's rather reluctant to accept. Yao, on the other hand, hardly mourns his death and later decides to avenge him by taking down the culprit with their combined gang. She visits Chang An at the hospital while he visits his father with the watch she found in Chang's burnt down house. He recognizes it as the one he gifted him when they first met and hears her out when she tells him his uncle Jing Hui is the culprit behind everything. Jing Hui almost walks in on them, but Yao manages to escape with Song's help. Still fearful of his uncle, Chang An reminisces about the old times when he moved into the chairman's house with his mother and eventually decided to help Yao. The following day, he replaces his uncle's pen with a tracker that Yao's team monitors 24/7, and they're eventually led to an apartment complex when Jinghui pays 15 a visit and hands him some documentation to help him escape his current life and finally begin living for himself. However, as soon as Yao steps into the elevator, its cables break and it falls, and it turns out that Jinghui already knew about the tracker and deliberately led them all to their death, successfully removing the last of the thorns in his side. Luckily, however, Shang-Chi gets there before Yao steps onto the lift and rescues her in the nick of time, and when she asks him how he knew what was gonna happen, he says he guessed that she would be the target after Chen. That's when she realizes Chang An is in trouble and rushes to the mall where he awaits her. Just as she gets there, she notices 15 walking toward him with a penknife and then warns him about it. His dumbass doesn't get in until the very last minute, and while he is saved with the police's help, Yao catches sight of a suspicious masked man and runs after him, and it turns out that it's Chin who was still alive, and though Yao realizes this herself, he refuses to confront her just yet. The gang captures Shang-Chi later and forces him to reveal Chin's whereabouts. Upon learning that he's staying at a hut on their old island, Yao visits him and after lashing out at him, hugs him and the two reconcile, and Chin explains how he barely escaped his death with Shang-Chi's help, but he chose to keep quiet so he could find clues against Jinghui, and then help the police catch him before he could come back to her and put her in harm's way. Upon hearing this, Yao embraces him and tells him not to worry about her since she's there to help him. The following day, after Jinghui helps 15 escape, Chin, Yao, and the gang arrange a meeting with a witness from 15 years ago who saw the culprit who set the fire. At the club, the couple reminisces about their first meeting and after flirting a little bit here and there, gets down to business. However, before they even meet the witness, 15 gets there and kidnaps him, and the it couple drives after him. However, before they can do anything, 15 falls to his death along with the witness, rendering them without a smidge of evidence. Later, while watching the CCTV footage from the club, the gang finds that the witness slid a USB into someone's pocket while being dragged away. However, unfortunately for them, this guy is the same guy who Yao scammed on the day she met Chin, and they lose all hope to ever attain evidence. However, when she calls him, he invites her to meet him on the day of Jingwee's inauguration as the company's new chairman. The night before the big day, Yao tricks Chin into drinking some water loaded with sleeping pills and decides to handle things on her own. On D-Day, the gang leads Yao's target into a room with her. However, even when she gets him alone, he refuses to give her the USB for any amount of money because even greater than his greed is his hatred for her, something he won't be putting aside. Meanwhile, Jingwei catches wind of this and orders his men to capture Yao's gang and locate her at once. Luckily, however, before things get completely out of hand, Chin arrives with a dagger in his hand and points it against Jingwei's neck, forcing him to head to the rooftop with him, and there, right before he sends him to his death, Yao arrives with the police and reveals that she got the evidence after reminding her target of his daughter and how disappointed she'd feel in him after knowing he'd helped a criminal escape. With this, Jingwei is finally captured and condemned, and Yao and Chin live happily ever after. Back in the real world, Yao completes her story and sends it to her editor, who decides to publish it despite receiving some backlash for the plot's predictability and the hefty number of coincidences. However, he does suggest using another editor's help to improve the plot, and like some fairy tale twist of fate, this editor turns out to be Chin. And this is where Yao and Chin's battle of wits end. Leave a comment down below to let us know which story you'd like to see next. Also, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll be seeing you guys on the next video.